Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, and in this video I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable carnival candy cake. I'm starting with my bottom tier already iced and it's in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. The top tier is a popcorn bucket and I have to taper it, so I'm going to show you how I carve and crumb coat and ice that tier. And this video is a little long, so I added chapters below so you can easily skip to different sections of the video. And I will also let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started.
Let's start by carving this cake. So this cake is built upside down. I have a 5-inch cake circle on the top right now and a 6-inch cake circle on the bottom. And I am just putting the top of the knife next to that 5-inch circle and the tip of the knife at the bottom next to the 6-inch circles to kind of just get this tapered. And I'm running my knife under hot water just to clean it off. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm getting a little bit of chocolate on the bottom of that cake circle and sticking it down. And then I want to crumb coat this cake. So I have some American buttercream and I'm just starting with a crumb coat. So it's just a thin layer. I'm starting at the very bottom and then going all the way up to the top of the cake. To get a sharp edge, I need to bring the icing over the top of that cardboard circle, and then I'm dipping my bench scraper in that hot water, wiping it off with a paper towel, holding that bench scraper on an angle since this cake is tapered, and just removing the excess. And then I'm taking my spatula and just removing that excess icing around the cardboard, and I'm going to put that in the refrigerator for about 4 hours so that crumb coat can solidify. And now I'm going to add the top coat. So again, I'm starting at the very bottom and only doing about like a 1/2 inch thickness of icing and dipping my bench scraper in the hot water. And I'm being a little more careful now because this is the final coating because I want to get this as smooth as possible. So again, I'm holding that bench scraper on an angle and trying to smooth out this icing as best as I can. And I'm using my Viva paper towel. And I go over this. I have a video where I go into full detail on how I make a popcorn bucket cake, and I will link that below. But I'm just smoothing it out with my fondant smoother after I smooth it with my hands, and then taking my spatula. And do you see how I'm going in? That way I'm not pulling the icing away from the cake. And now I am refining this edge. I'm going to stick that back in the refrigerator. And that was in the fridge for about 5 to 10 minutes. And now I'm just taking my butcher paper and doing a final smoothing process and refining that top edge, which is actually going to be the bottom of the cake. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the fridge. Now I have Gum-Tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. This is mixed into all of my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. Store-bought fondant is way too soft. It's going to drag if you use store-bought fondant and try to cut stuff. So I mix a little bit of this powder into my marshmallow fondant, knead it into the fondant, roll it out and let it sit. And then it's going to stiffen. It's going to be so much easier to cut. I won't get any dragging in the fondant as I cut it. I will link this in the description for you. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And I measured my cake and I printed that tent out the size I wanted it to be. That white fondant is rolled out really thin, and I'm doing my trace cut and smooth method to make this. Now this can be a little tricky because there's a lot of little pieces here, but do you see? I'm just tracing all of these white pieces of the tent. I wasn't tracing those little half circles. I'm going to put those on later. But do you see this white piece? I have to look past the little door and try to figure out where these lines go. So sometimes I always say you have to look past the picture to try to figure out where you're going to trace all these pieces. And then I want to trace this little white part that frames the door kind of. So I just moved the paper to a different section of that fondant and I'm tracing this entire thing. And now you want to make sure that you don't press too hard. You don't want to poke a hole in the fondant. You just want to transfer that line. And now I'm taking my X-Acto knife and I am cutting out all of these pieces. And anytime I cut anything out of fondant, the fondant's usually jagged. So I like to take my fingers and my tools and just smooth out my cuts so it makes everything look nice and clean and pretty. And now I'm going to do the same thing for all of these other white pieces, cutting them all out and smoothing my cuts. And then I am doing the same thing for these red pieces, which I actually have on hot pink fondant, tracing them. And again, I might have to look past the door and try to figure out where to continue these lines. And then I'm going to cut them all out as well. And now I want to trace this black piece onto black fondant as well. And I'm tracing it a little bit bigger than it is in the picture so that white piece can cover it. You'll see what I mean when I put this together. So now I'm piecing all these little fondant pieces together, and I'm cutting it at the top just to make sure that they all come to a point. And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind each piece, and I'm sticking it down, keeping the picture close for reference. That way I can make sure that it looks like the picture. And I'm sticking it to another piece of really thin white fondant that does have that Tylose powder mixed in. For the top of the tent, I'm putting all the pieces down first to make sure that I get them in the correct position. And then once they're in the right position, I'm getting a little bit water behind each piece and sticking it down. Now I'm taking a little circle cutter. I want to make those little half circles that are on the bottom of the top section of the tent, and I'm cutting them in half, and I'm lining them up first to make sure they're in the correct position, and again then getting a little bit of water behind each one and sticking them down. And now I took that middle green piece off so I can get some water behind the black piece and stick that down, and then I'm sticking the white piece on top. So do you see why I cut that black piece a little bit bigger? It's easier to just put the white piece on top. And now I'm just removing a section of that white part and sticking that green one back down. So it's a little confusing, but you guys can do it. It just takes a little bit of practice. And now I am cutting this entire thing out. I'm not doing a white border, so I'm cutting along the fondant lines that I made, flip it over, take my fingers and smooth my cuts, and then flip it right side up. And I'm going to set that aside to dry flat for a couple days. Now I printed this ticket out the size I wanted it to be, and I made this little Rice Krispie ball, and I just wanted to make sure that that was going to fit on top of the Rice Krispie ball, and it does. And I printed out the name so it could fit inside of that ticket. So I rolled that white fondant out kind of thick, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method again to make this ticket. I'm just tracing the outline, and then I found a little circle cutter that is the same size as those corner curves, and I'm just cutting each one of those out. And now I want to deepen the lines with my Dresden tool, and I'm doing a little inner detail, and I'm freehanding this. So I'm just holding this Dresden tool straight, and I'm doing lines on the inside of the edges of the tickets and making sure that I do the curved lines around the corners as well. And then I'm aligning this name on here. I'm making sure that it is center, and then holding that in place so it doesn't shift, and tracing this name onto the ticket. And now I want to take my X-Acto knife and cut this out, and then use my fingers to smooth my cuts. And I'm going to set this aside to dry flat on this little cutting board for a couple days. I really want it to hold its shape. Now I want to make the popcorn. I have a cookie sheet with a little cake box lid on there, sprinkle down some cornstarch, and I'm kneading a little bit of that Tylose powder into this fondant so it can set hard and hold its shape. I'm ripping off a little piece and rolling a bunch of these little white balls, and I did that tons of times. I'm going to set those aside for a couple days to dry. And now I'm doing the border for the bottom. So I rolled that fondant out really long. I'm using my ribbon cutter to cut a long ribbon, use my rulers to straighten that out. And then I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator, and I'm using a wet paper towel just to clean the board. Sorry, House of the Dragon is in the background. And I'm using some piping gel around the bottom, and then just wrapping that around where it meets in the back, cut it and push the seam together. Then I'm using a palette knife just to press that back down. And now I'm holding my diamond cutters to see which one I can use. I want 2 diamonds on here, and I think that one was good. So I cut out testers. So I cut out 2 diamonds. I'm using some Crisco and sticking them down. I cut one of them in half, and I'm doing half at the bottom, one in the middle, half at the top, and that's the perfect size. So I want to peel these off, and now I want to get some water in here. The reason I use Crisco first is to make sure that those diamonds were the right size and they were going to fit on the cake. So I didn't want to stick them down with water until I knew they were the right size. So I went back to my fondant and I cut out a ton of these diamonds, and now I'm cutting a bunch of them in half, and then I'm going to wrap these around the cake. So I'm starting in the very front, and then I go to the right, and then I go to the left, and then I go to the right, and then to the left until I get to the back of the cake. In case the pattern doesn't match, it's going to not match in the back of the cake, but it matched. The cake gods were on my side. Now I have this yellow fondant rolled out really thin, and I think that's a number 12 tip, and I cut a bunch of circles, get a little bit of water underneath, and just stick all of these down in the intersections. And that looks really good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now, I am using a microplane to shave all of these little Rice Krispie bumps off of here. Use my hands to get rid of all those crumbs. And then I'm trying to form this into an apple. So I'm pushing my thumbs down in the very top and then rolling it on here so it tapers at the bottom. Now, I just made some Rice Krispies and I rolled it into a ball and I let it sit for a day or two, and then that's when I continued this process. And I got some American buttercream on the outside, and my hands are clean. I'm dipping my hands in some warm water and just smoothing it out. I find it so much easier if you just use your hands to do this process, and it's not a thick layer of icing, just enough to make it stick. I rolled that fondant out pretty thin. I have it on a turntable. And this part is tricky. So I have to pull the fondant out to make sure there's no wrinkles. I'm getting rid of the excess here. And I'm trying to wrap this sphere in fondant. So I'm trying to get rid of all the wrinkles as it goes towards the bottom. And then once I get it kind of tucked towards the bottom, I'm going to cut some of the excess off so I don't have too much. I'm going to lift it up, and now I'm squeezing that excess fondant towards the bottom. And I got to work here in sections. You have to be patient. So I'm cutting the excess fondant off, and then I'm squeezing it and kind of lifting it up and smoothing out the wrinkles, and then cutting a little bit more off. Do not cut too close to that or you're gonna create a hole. So I'm just cutting off the excess fondant and continuing this process, squeezing it, lifting it up, smoothing out the wrinkles, and cutting it off. And then once I do that final time, I'm going to roll that bottom part down on the countertop and try to smooth it out the best I can. I know it's a weird way, but that's the best way that I found that I can cover something like this in fondant. Then I'm taking a piece of fondant and smoothing that out. I find it easiest if you smooth the fondant with the fondant on something that has a lot of curves like this, and that looks good. I'm going to set that aside. Now I am making the stripes for the popcorn bucket. I rolled that fondant out really thin. I have my ribbon cutter set to a wider setting than that border was, and I'm cutting those out and using my rulers to straighten them all, and I'm going to set those aside while I wash my hands and get ready to stack this cake. I got that out of the refrigerator, and then I am using my ruler to measure how tall these straws should be. And once I mark all of those, then I'm going to take my scissors and cut that marker off, and I'm going to throw that piece away. The bottom of the popcorn bucket is 5 inches. I have a 5-inch cake pan. I'm making sure that it is center, and I'm using my little needle tool to trace that. This way I know that I need to put the straws on the inside of there so the cardboard circle will set on those straws. I'm going to make sure that it's even, get down some icing, and I do have a tutorial where I go into detail on how I stack cakes, and I will link that below. Then I got that out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard, so I can handle it without messing it up. And then I'm going to flip that right side up and center that on the cake. And now I'm using a knife just to remove that top circle, which was the bottom circle when it was attached to that cake drum. And now I'm getting a little bit of buttercream icing and filling this in. And I also want to get some icing along the sides and coming up over the edge of the cake, kind of like I did before. And now I'm using my bench scraper on an angle, dipped in that hot water, just at the very top to start to smooth this out. And then I'm pushing that excess icing back. Now remember, this cake is cold. That icing is hard on there, so I'm not going to mess it up as I fill in this top section. And I'm just using my little spatula and refining this top edge, making sure that it is as straight as possible. And then I'm dipping that in some hot water and smoothing this out with hot water. And that looks really good. Now I want to fill in that little void in the bottom. So I got a little bit of icing in a parchment triangle, and I'm squeezing that in there. And then I'm taking my spatula and just smoothing this out as best as I can. I'm removing the excess, and then I start to smooth it up the cake. That way you can't, I'm blending it in basically. I do have a video where I go into detail on how I have seamless cakes that don't need any borders, and I will link that below. And now I am doweling this. This had to travel far, so I double doweled it. I did 2 kind of off center, and then I'm filling those circles or those holes in with some icing, and I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I want to make this popcorn sign, and all the pictures that I use will be linked below. But again, I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method. So I'm tracing this onto the white fondant, and then I always cut the center pieces of the letters out first, and then use my tools and smooth them out before I cut the rest of the letters out. Just trust me, it's so much easier to cut the center pieces first. And then do you see in that popcorn sign, there's a little yellow detail? So I'm taking my Dresden tool and I'm just carving in some lines in here before I cut these all out. So again, I'm going to cut these out of here and then take my fingers and smooth my cuts. And then I've got a little bit of water behind each letter, and I'm sticking it down on this black fondant. I have the picture close because the letters are kind of crooked, so I'm trying to put them in the exact position that they are in the picture. And then I'm getting really close and I'm cutting an even black border around this entire thing. And again, do I even have to say it? I'm going to take my tools and my fingers and smooth out all those jagged edges. And I don't want it to dry flat, so I'm storing it in a Ziploc bag so it can remain pliable. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator, getting a little bit of piping gel around the bottom section, and I actually didn't have to do that seamless icing on there, but whatever. I ended up putting a border around the bottom. And now I want to put these stripes on that I rolled out earlier. So I'm starting in the very front and doing a stripe up the front, and I have these angled scissors. I will link them below. I'm cutting it just above the top of the cake. Then I went to the back of the cake and did a separate stripe. And now I'm going to the side of the cake doing another, and the side and doing another. So now these are evenly spaced out, and it makes it so much easier. Now I can put 2 stripes in the middle of all of the ones that I just put down. So everything is evenly spaced out. And again, I'm taking my scissors and just cutting all of these so they are just sticking over the top of that cake. And I am going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I rolled this white fondant out really thin, and I'm cutting a bunch of these circles out, and I'm doing the tops of the popcorn. So I have a flour former and a ball tool, and I'm just thinning all of these out, and then I squeeze one end and squeeze the other and kind of push it together to get this little shape here. And I'm doing that for a bunch of these circles. It took me a while to make all of these. And then I'm getting a little bit of water underneath each one and then pressing them down on all of these little popcorn balls. The popcorn probably took a couple hours to make. It is very time consuming. Then I'm dipping a tiny paintbrush in some brown gel food coloring and then coloring in the centers of all of these, and I'm setting those aside overnight to dry. Now I'm making lollipops, and I have some thick white fondant and thin colored fondant. I cut a bunch of circles out, and then I have a leaf cutter, and I'm just cutting like a third of the way in on the tip, and 2 in each color. I hope this makes sense, but you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm taking that same circle cutter and cutting 2 white circles out. And these are going to be fun little swirl lollipops. So I'm getting a little bit of water behind each color and having them meet in the middle where the point is and sticking all the colors down. And then once I have that done, I'm taking a skewer and just twisting it in there to create a hole. I don't want to put any lollipop sticks in there yet because it's still kind of pliable and I don't want to distort it. So I just created the hole, and I'm going to set those aside to dry. Now I am rolling fondant out really thin, and I am making these little swirly lollipops. So I'm doing 2 colors, and I'm making sure that I roll these out the even thickness. You saw how thick that was. I'm putting one against the other, and then I'm cutting it where it comes to an end and curling that around, and that green fondant was sticking out a little bit there. And I'm just wrapping it around, and then I need to cut the excess off. So I have to go in on an angle so it can sit flush with the rest of that lollipop. And then I got a little bit of water underneath it, and I am making a hole in there so I can put the lollipop sticks in there later, and I'm going to set those aside. So again, I rolled out the 2 logs, and I'm rolling them up, and then I'm cutting it on an angle and then pressing that together. Oh, that wasn't right. Sometimes you have to do like a deeper angle to get it to sit flush with that piece. And then I get a little bit of water behind it and press that down, and then I want to create another little hole. So again, I'm just using that skewer and creating the hole so the lollipop stick can go in there later after it dries. Now I have 3 different colors. I'm doing a swirl here. So do you see how I put them all together, and I'm not mixing them too much. I'm just swirling them. I made a little S, and I'm rolling it in my hands and rolling it out. And I'm twisting it. So I'm twisting the right side and the left side to create this little swirl effect. I'm doing this little tall lollipop, and I don't even know what it's called. When I'm rolling this out really long, I cut that bottom part on an angle, and I wet that skewer, and I'm starting at the very bottom, and I'm just wrapping this around the entire skewer until it gets to the top. So I keep twisting the fondant so it has that little swirl shape, and where it comes to the top, I'm just squeezing it shut, roll it on the countertop to even it all out, and I'm going to set that aside. So I did that in a few colors, and also I'm making a candy cane. So I want to curve the top end and just twist it, and then I'm going to cut off the excess. And then when I transfer it over to a cookie sheet, I just had to reshape it to make sure that it dries to the correct shape. Now I am rolling out some purple fondant in a log, and this is going to be the top of the popcorn bucket. So I got that out of the refrigerator, and then I'm getting a little bit of piping gel down where it's going to stick, and it was a little too long, so I just placed it down first and I cut off the excess, and then I'm using my fingers to attach it to the very tops of those stripes that were sticking out a little bit over the top, and then where it meets in the back, I just cut it and pressed it together. Now I'm making the jelly beans, so you roll it into a ball and then roll it into an oblong shape, and I'm also making like little bubble gum candies, so those are easy. You just roll them in a ball, and there's all the extra candies. I'm setting those aside. Now I need to make the number 10 topper, and again, I am just tracing this onto the fondant, cutting these out, smoothing my cuts, and then getting a little bit of water behind it and putting it on the background color and cutting an even border around these numbers and then smoothing my cuts. And I'm going to set that aside so it can dry flat and hard for a couple days. Now I have my airbrush coloring. I have some yellow and a little bit of brown, and I just wanted to do a test spray to make sure it's the right color. And I don't have it on a high spray. It's like a medium intensity spray, if you will. And I'm just going around here and spraying all of these. I want them to still be a little bit of white. Like, I don't want it to be all bright yellow, so I'm just moving them around and spraying a little bit. I don't want to cover the entire thing, but just having enough yellow on there to make it look like buttered popcorn. And once I did that, I just straightened them all out before I set them aside to dry for a couple days. Now I want to make the flag for the tent, so I'm just cutting this piece here, and I use that little cutter so it contours to the top of the tent, and I free-handed this flag. So I'm just kind of doing like little wavy lines here. And that'll sit flush with that little pole there, and I'm going to put that on a cutting board and set that aside till I'm ready to put it on the cake. Now I have black American buttercream icing with a tip number 2 and a very steady hand. You can't drink coffee before you do this, and I'm tracing all these borders and these letters on here. This font is called Cool Dots, and it is in my favorite fonts PDF, which is linked in the description, but there's little dots at the ends of each of the lines here in all of these letters. So I just am trying to trace these and making these look as clean as possible. And then I'm taking a wet paintbrush and pushing in all of my icing nipples, because the icing comes to a point when you lift the tip away. So I like to push them all in to make it look nice and clean. And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind all of these little dots that I cut out of these different colors of fondant. And look how cute that looks. I'm going to set that aside for a day or so that icing can dry. Now I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator, and let's decorate this. So I'm getting a lot of buttercream icing on the top of here, and I want it to dome in the center. So I'm adding a little bit more buttercream in here, and the popcorn, it has to lift up a little bit so it looks like it's full of popcorn. It'll make sense as I do that. I have a dowel that is sharpened on one end. I'm pushing it through that apple and then sticking that down into the cake, and I'm doweling it down into the cake board, and then I had to use my snips and cut off the excess. And now I want to put all of these little popcorn kernels in here. Kernels, or yeah, that's the right word, right? So I'm doing them in different angles. It's kind of like a little puzzle. You have to figure out how to fit all of these in here. I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind some of them. Some icing goes behind some of them so I can fill in any of these spaces. And I'm kind of turning some to the left, turning them to the right, making sure some of them stick to the apple. So I want to make it look like the apple is in a full bucket of popcorn. Then I got some toothpicks behind some of these pieces so I can stick them in there and fill in the gaps without worrying about them falling off. And that looks really good. Now I need to add this yellow detail to this popcorn. So I have a little bit of yellow petal dust, and you don't want too much on your paintbrush. So I have a really thin head paintbrush. Is that a word? Thin head? Has a small head on there. I'm just filling in those lines. Then I get a little bit of icing and piping gel behind this popcorn sign, making sure that is front and center, and I am sticking that down. And that's why I wanted to keep it in the Ziploc bag so it would stay pliable and I could contour it to the side of the cake. Now that tent, I'm just seeing where it's touching the cake, get a little bit of icing behind it, and I'm going to push that down. And whenever I use icing to stick decorations to cakes, sometimes the icing sticks out the side, so I just take a dry paintbrush and remove the excess. I'm getting a little bit of glue on the cake drum and the back of that ribbon and wrapping that around there to finish off that cake drum, make it look nice and pretty. And now I'm just putting on the finishing touches. So I'm getting that little flag on here and I'm removing any of that excess icing that was sticking out. And now I want to I'm sorry I'm out of frame, I'm putting 2 toothpicks down into that apple on an angle, hammering them down so they're not sticking out too much. And I'm going to put a lollipop on there. So I'm just putting these all on this cake in a haphazard way. I'm just holding them up to see what looks best, and then I'm sliding them down into the cake. And this little lollipop, I need to stick to the front. I'm going to put some melted chocolate behind it and then hooking it down on those 2 toothpicks that are on there and that melted chocolate. That thing's not going to fall off the cake. I'm taking a dry paintbrush just to remove the excess chocolate that was sticking out. And then I'm putting the finishing touches on this cake. So I'm sticking the lollipops in here. I like to put down the candy canes in the position first before I glue them down. So if you see this one, I don't really know where I want to put it. That looks good there. So then I'll get some piping gel underneath it and stick it down. So I'm just doing that for all the decorations. And now I want to put these tiny candies on here. Sometimes I get like a half of a toothpick underneath it and stick it down. Sometimes I just use piping gel. When it's on the cake drum, I hammer half a toothpick in there, then use my snips and cut it down so it's not sticking out too much, and then I can stick those candies on there. Now to get this tag on here, I'm getting a little bit of melted chocolate on the back. It's white fondant, so I'm using white chocolate, and it is a little sloppy. I'm trying to make it look as clean as possible, and I want to completely cover that dowel with the white chocolate. And then I'm cleaning it up to make sure that it looks nice and pretty and not too messy, and I'm scraping off that excess chocolate. I'm doing the same thing for the number. I got yellow chocolate on it because it was yellow fondant, and then making it look as nice and smooth as possible. And then I'm just adding the little extra detail to this apple. And here is the cake. How adorable is that?
So there you go. How adorable is this cake? And a little backstory, Reagan's mom actually ordered the same design for her 1st birthday and asked me to do the same thing for her 10th birthday, except replacing the light blue with some teal. Now this cake on the inside, the top tier, like you saw, it's 3 layers, they're not torted, and it's 2 6-inch and 1 5-inch layer. And then the bottom tier is a 3-layer, not torted 8-inch cake. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that below. It feeds 50 to 60 people, and I totally undercharged for this cake, but it's okay because she has ordered so many cakes from me. This one was $600. If I have to make it again, it would probably be closer to $750 or $800. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, all of my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So I will link all of those below. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. There are 3 tiers to the program. The base tier is called the Cake Pop tier, and in that tier, you can support me monthly and also get free and discounted extras being those ebooks that I mentioned earlier. And you get early access to new YouTube content as well as exclusive access to content I make only for my Cake Academy members. And then the top 2 tiers have all of that, plus access to my exclusive Facebook group. And in that group, I go live and we do Zoom meetings and we talk about pricing and customer complaints, and we do question and answer periods. I post pictures of all of the cakes that I make along with how much I charged, and we are having so much fun in this group. I would love to have you aboard. All of that information is below. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. Remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.